I am Father William Nellikal from Cochin, and I belong to the Archdiocese of Varapalli. And it was a coincidence, or I don't know, maybe God's plan, or I don't know, Vatican's plan, that I got a chance to work in Vatican media. I was called by Vatican directly, and my bishop agreed to give me in contract to Vatican media, and I worked for Vatican News and the Malayalam section for 13 years, 13 years. And I didn't expect that much, but I had to work like that because I was taken at a time when the website was begun in Malayalam. So I started that, then I moved into running it and running to work on the mileage of it and so on. So that's my moving into the life of Vatican. And now recollecting Papa Francesco or Pope Francis, I feel very nostalgic and proud to say I happened to meet Cardinal Bergoglio, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, George Bergoglio, in the Vatican residence where I was. It's a Vatican house called Domus Internationalis. It is in the center of Rome, very close to Roman Senate, a street called Via della Scrofa, 70, that is 70, where I used to live on the second flat, and it was second floor. I was in 211, and I don't know, coincidence or my luck, I must say, in 205, one day I met a cardinal called Jorge Bergoglio from Buenos Aires, and we got acquainted, and we happened to meet every day. And he told me that I am a Jesuit, but I love to live in this house. This is so ancient, antique, and beautiful, and very quiet. And I found him coming for Mass. He will celebrate one day as a cardinal, as the main celebrant. Next day onwards, he will move out and stand out as like one of the priests. So, very unassuming person, Archbishop of Buenos Aires, a tall, hefty, beautiful man, but I found his one leg was giving him some trouble and he was limping. So I had a great consideration to him because he was already at that time in 70s, and it was in 2010 that I met him first, in towards close to December, Christmas time, and I found him a man of prayer and much seriousness, and he loved maybe solitude and so on. And I found him very often praying in the chapel, praying sometimes with the beautiful painting of Caravaggio that was in our house, this Vatican house, Domus and so on. He was meditating on that like that. Anyway, living in 211 and 205, I used to meet him, and occasionally I used to carry his bag because there used to be a car from Vatican to pick up the cardinal, and he was sometimes carrying his books and so on. I used to help him because he was limping a bit. Walked up to the lift and we moved to the ground floor, and off I saw him by car to Vatican, and I used to walk to my office in Vatican. So that is my first meeting with Papa Francesco, and I experienced that he was a simple man and he was a friendly person. So much so, one day I was inviting him for breakfast, and he told me, Father William, I don't take breakfast, you may not know that, and I make coffee at home in my room and I enjoy. You are welcome, he said. So I happened to walk into his room. We sat together and had the breakfast, a cup of coffee and a biscuit. So that struck a note of great joy for me, knowing a cardinal from Latin America. And to my surprise, when he came for the conclave after the resignation of Papa Benedict in 2013, when the white smoke came and the new Pope was led to the central balcony of St. Peter's central balcony, and I was amused and I was shocked or surprised. I was in tears that it was Jorge Bergoglio, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, whom I knew so close in Domus Internationalis, in the hostel or in the Vatican house where I was living. It was a great joy. I noticed that he was not in the list of the speculations of international media, but like a blue from the bolt, the Latin American Pope came up and his name was announced, to my surprise and to my joy. I feel thousands of people standing in front of Vatican's St. Peter's Basilica and in the square of St. Peter's, also probably dumbfounded to hear a Latin American name, Jorge Bergoglio, who is not much known to the public, to the Romans in particular, a non-Italian Pope, a Latin American Pope. But his personality and his simplicity struck the people already. First of all, he came in a very simple attire of a bishop, white cassock, a silverish a pectoral cross, as it is called, pectoral cross, the cross of the shepherd. And he wore that he was wearing as a bishop. He didn't wear the new attires of a new pope. He did not wear the red paraphernalia and the new dress of a pope. He didn't wear the red stola, which was so big. And he, in simple white cassock, he addressed the people in his slow Italian. He was fumbling a bit, but he was beautifully communicating and strongly speaking to the people. And it was a touching moment that before I bless you, I want you, dear people, to bless me. I need your prayers and blessings that I can lead the universal church. And he bowed his head in front of that multitude that was gathered in a evening after 7 o'clock. It was drizzling a bit, yet patiently the Roman crowd, probably an international crowd and international media massively around waiting to see the new Pope. And he bowed before the people, and few seconds he stood like that, getting the blessings from the people. Then only he addressed them and blessed them. So the great simplicity, the evangelical simplicity of Jesus, I would say, was manifested for me personally in the life of Bergoglio very naturally. So that is my first experience, standing in the square of St. Peter's at the election of the new Pope after the resignation of Papa Benedict. Thereafter, I must say, I lived almost 8 years with Papa Francisco, because ever since he assumed the office on 13th March 2013, and then till I came back to India in 2022, about 8 years with Papa Francisco. As a staff of him, we don't meet personally every time, but you are around him and close to him to see how he moves and how he works, how he calls others to be in creating a new church. I was noticing that he was a man for a new church. And again, I would say he assumed he wanted to preach the evangelical value of mercy more than anything in his life, and he wanted that in the church and in the world. Therefore, I felt he declared the first thing as a pope, and the most important thing was that extraordinary year of mercy. Extraordinary Jubilee Year of Mercy was declared by Pope Francis in 2016, which probably manifested his outlook towards the papacy and to his mission in the church for the coming years. When I say he took that element of mercy, he was trying to bring out the strong image of merciful Christ in the gospel, was merciful to the sinners, was merciful even to his enemies, was merciful to sick people, um, the poor who are suffering, who are hungry, and the mercy of Christ, which I call the evangelical mercy of Christ, was picked up by Pope Francis, and that he declared as a jubilee year, an extraordinary year of jubilee of mercy, as he himself called it. And I must say, in that same year, the jubilee year itself, he went to the Central Africa, one of the most poorest countries in the world. And to the surprise of the world, the jubilee was inaugurated in a little chapel of the Central Africa, a place called Lethos. I said, in the small place in the Cap, very close to Central Africa, where most amount of poor are seen, and the true poverty of Africa, or we can say the poverty of the world, could be reflected there. And he declared the Jubilee Year of Mercy open there in Central Africa, in this place Lathos. So what I feel, the mission of Pope moved towards the evangelical mercy to be a reality in the church. That is what he wanted, a poor church, a simple church that will love the poor and include everyone, and an all-inclusive church, which he always reflected or repeatedly preached. He wanted every strata of the society to be included in the church passionately and very patiently in the way of Christ. Probably as an Indian, I reflected, I was surprised to see that Pope Francis declared Mother Teresa as a saint in that year of Jubilee of mercy, and called Mother as the a mother of mercy, a mercy and merciful to the poor. So for us Indians, probably it is notable that it was during the extraordinary Jubilee year that Pope Francis declared Mother Teresa as a mother of mercy, and the of sainthood of Mother Teresa was declared in that Jubilee year. And this merciful attitude of Christ, which was seen much in the person of Pope, was also leading him to reform the church. In the third millennium, church was, of course, after Vatican II, growing with the modern world, but Pope Francis found lots of defects or shortcomings in the church administration, financial administration of Vatican, and also in every department. So I was slowly noticing him entering into a renewal of the church, maybe a radical renewal of the church, which was very challenging, and probably he touched very sensitive area, reform of the financial aspect of Vatican. And he is probably in the history of the church first time in Vatican an international auditing system was introduced. Many cardinals, or some of the cardinals, some of the heads of the departments of Vatican refused, some wanted to reject it, but Pope slowly guided all of them to compile by this new system of financial auditing, which is acceptable to the world, and which is also probably a first and important step Pope Francis took towards the reform of Vatican, particularly when he touched the financial aspect. Probably also he was trying to eliminate the possibility of corruption in Vatican, which has happened in the past history through and in the Vatican Bank, so-called. So that scandals of Vatican Bank, all that was to an extent controlled and clarified through this reform of Papa Francis, and which he did not take himself. For this reform, he called a group of cardinals, which is called C9 or C10. He selected 9, 10 cardinals from different parts of the country to discuss various aspects of reform, particularly in the first level, the financial reform. He was meeting practically every 3 months. All the cardinals were busy, the Pope were busy, but he found time to be with them 2-3 days of every quarterly meetings, and faithfully made reports and patterns of reforms that will be long lasting and that will be beneficial to the growth of the church. And living in the modern world or in the third millennium, to witness Christ and his life of simplicity and poverty. Another aspect of reform he touched is the Vatican administration. The dicasteries or various departments of Vatican was going on themselves. For example, where I worked, the Vatican media or the communication department was very big in the sense it had a press, it has a radio which was installed by the inventor of radio himself, Marconi, which is very old, as old as 1936 and more probably. And there was Vatican television, Vatican photography, Vatican's publications, and all these were Vatican's media. Maybe we can add into that the Vatican Library and the Vatican Museum. I want to say that each department was administering themselves, the finance and the management, etc. But what Pope Francis did, he unified the Vatican media under one umbrella, and he introduced a common financial secretariat for Vatican, which means the finance was administered by the financial secretariat of Vatican, but the Department of Communication managed the central Vatican administration for finance, and probably it is as part of the reform that he appointed for the first time a lay person called Paolo Ruffini, who had much experience in Vatican media, to be the head of Vatican communications department. That also indicates his bold steps towards reform of Vatican administration. When I spoke about communications department, the same way he reformed every department. For example, the dicastery for integral human development, which included the service for refugees and migrants and for other humanitarian causes of Vatican. Another department may be Vatican's liturgical department, which was also sometimes confusing, which was mixed with dogmatic departments and other theological departments, which he wanted to reform with the specificity of liturgy and liturgical activities. So, same way, department for priests, bishops, every department or pontifical missions, all these were studied and restudied, and he made modifications in the management, in the financial administration, etc. Even taking the case of the central department of the Vatican Secretariat, which is also dealing much of the finance and personnel of Vatican, was also brought into this and brought under the reform, which many thought he would not dare to do that, but Pope entered into that field and in that area of Vatican Secretariat also to reform the church, to be truthful to the mission of the church that will become beneficial to the people of the world. And of course, it is a great model for humanity that church has a transparency and administration that is with the people and for the people, with the faithful and for the faithful. Say, reform of Pope Francis also refers to an all-inclusive culture, which he repeatedly spoke, he wrote, and he exhorted Christianity all around to embrace the humanity as a whole, not to be staying a church that is formal with the faithful crowd. He wanted church to go out like a pastor. The image of the good shepherd of Christ was strongly administered by Pope Francis, asking his clergy to soil the clerical formal dress, to be with the poor and to mingle with the poor, which he concretely included in a liturgical service called washing of the feet on Maundy Thursday. Historically, it was done for washing of the feet of 12 men in the history of the church, very traditionally. But he said in 2016, he introduced a decree which is called Cena Domini, the table of the Lord, which means the Last Supper. That document says, as a pattern of the church, as an all-inclusive church, a culture of an all-inclusive church, he wanted to wash the feet of a representational group from every strata of the society or the pastoral community. For example, to take a representation from the aged people, a representation of a family, representation of a man and a woman, or a youth, young man, young woman, or a child, or homeless people, handicapped people, sick people. So he wanted all to be included in the church, and he very drastically made this reform of washing of the feet on Maundy Thursday. Probably in Kerala in particular, it was not acceptable to many people. We are so orthodox and traditional, and then this 2016 decree of Pope is still not executed in many parishes, and yet waiting to be, because not able to accept the idea of washing the feet of a woman, washing the feet of a sick person, a handicapped person, and also even some clergy, I feel, stood back and said that now the Pope is asking us to wash the feet of women and so on. I think sometimes this is the reform which is a challenge from the side of Pope Francis, and when we are bidding farewell to him, we can recollect such moments where he has exhorted a challenging reforms in the church. Speaking about the reform, maybe I should have said it earlier. The very first thing Pope Francis did was to keep aside the apostolic palace. He should have been living in the big apostolic palace of Vatican with all facilities. But probably in the history, not probably, it is in the history for the first time, a Pope keeping aside Vatican's palace only for some official purposes, and he volunteered or himself accepted to live in a simple Vatican hostel in the flats called Santa Marta, and he lived in the first floor of that with a working office, a living room, and a simple reception hall. And in the initial stage, I remember Vatican security wing posted a Swiss guard in front of his room, which he refused. And they came out and they started standing in front of Vatican's that house called Santa Marta. There were hundreds of clergy living in that flats. So Pope, one among them living, and he was also coming to the common refectory. Towards the end, they put him in one side with his secretary or assisting staffs. Yet that common refectory was the refectory of Pope, and that common home called Santa Marta was one of the flats of Pope Francis himself, the head of the Universal Church, which all shows his reform and also his great simplicity and humanity and his love to be with the common people or the ordinary people as a witness of Christ's simplicity and humility to the world. And when I speak about his merciful attitude, and which is also part of the reform, he manifested to the people who are considered sinful, for example, the homosexuals, the lesbians. He was very often accused by clergy and Vatican's dogmatic departments. But what Jesus manifested in his life, Pope Francis was trying to manifest or to make it as a part of reform that should come into the life of the church every day. So when we say he blessed the lesbians, doesn't mean that he is accepting that pattern of living, but he is being kind and merciful to them. His openness to understand their personal issues and how they were thrown into such way of living. And he was over concerned about that, and he was willing to understand them and to forgive them. Probably that is what Christ did. Even a prostitute, a sinful woman, was openly forgiven by him, and who should have been stoned to death by the community of that time. But the forgiveness that Jesus showed, the mercy that Christ showed, was probably living in the life of Pope Francis also as reform and also as a Pope of mercy. And again, I'll say the evangelical mercy that is very much dominant in the life of Pope Francis. See, Pope's encyclical called Laudato Si, which is an ecological document. The world got a shock. Can a Pope speak on ecology? But he spoke on ecology with a spiritual dimension, but concretely touching the misuse of nature, the misuse of this common home, as Pope himself addresses repeatedly in his document. This world is a common home given to us by God, and it is blessed with beautiful nature, living beings, along with the crown of creation as humanity. And if we don't care for this world and we continue to destroy it, cutting trees, felling of trees, or by industrial pollutions, the pollutions from the factory, destroying our waters and our nature, Pope says, if we don't save this world together in a fraternal way, there is every possibility that we perish in this world together. So I think this document, as sometimes can be negatively looked by scientists as a spiritual reflection, but Pope has touched every aspect of this world and its ecological issues. Sometimes he calls the sins of ecological sins of the world, asking us again to revive, reform, the world, that we can live together as a humanity. It is very interesting to note that Pope was always associated with football players, and I came to know that he was the confessor of football players. Particularly, he was officially the confessor of the national team of Argentina. In his biography, we can see that as a young man, he was a lover of football, and he played himself football in the school and college and so on. And later, as a priest, as a bishop, as a cardinal, he kept that relationship football players. For example, Maradona was a frequent visitor to Vatican, and many Argentinian players came personally after his papacy, and they were out of protocols to meet him in his private office anytime. So they had the freedom, particularly Maradona, and every time he visited the Pope, he embraced him so intimately, closely, and gifted him with one of his international jerseys that he wore in the World Cup. I used to, number 10, I used to see that. And Vatican used to put in auction. There's a lottery, sometimes it comes as a prize and so on. And even other Latin American players like Ronaldinho and Messi even I've seen in Vatican. Not only that, the Latin American teams, particularly the Argentinians and the Brazilians, before going for a World Cup or a European Cup, they always touch their flight via Rome, and they visit Papa Francesco. They had a private gathering and a blessing and prayer, and they believed in that. As a continuation of that, probably Papa Francesco has a club for sports people and particularly football players called Scola, the emblem of which is also a football in hand like that. And the Scola was now made a pontifical organization, and it has an office in Vatican. In Vatican's property, very side of the river Tiber. I don't exactly remember that area, but it has become a pontifical organization, and he invited the Argentinian players to play with Italian team to kick open his Scolas in Italy. And thereafter, every international visit for Francis opened a unit of Scola in different countries like Brazil, even to Philippines, even in Japan when he visited. I think more than now 90 countries it has spread, promoting not only football, cultural activities, youth helping youth, children helping children. That is his idea behind the Scolas. And the Scolas occurrentes, schools coming together, that is a Latin word he has used. He opened it as a bishop of Buenos Aires, and that organization internationally it has become, and it has some even helping schools and colleges who are part of it. Maybe slowly it will become to India also, I believe. And I want to say something more, that Pope in one of his personal chat with me as an Indian, when I got a chance, even while coming away from Vatican, I got a chance to speak to him. But I passionately understood how he loved very much India and Gandhi. And Pope, I felt he was a Gandhian at heart. He was appreciating the mercy, attitude of mercy and ahimsa principles Gandhi had in his political life and social life. And he probably imitated Gandhi very much, and he wanted to come to India. Unfortunately, it did not happen. Our government probably could not make it real, and Vatican embassy and probably the Indian embassy couldn't work it out. Yet now Pope is no more, but I want to tell, twice I have heard from his heart whenever he met that I love to come to India and see Gandhi's house, Gandhi's samadhi and so on. He has picked up those words, ahimsa and so on. So He was passionate about India, but we can pray for him and bid farewell in a spiritual way. And we can be thankful to him that Indians also loved to have him, but we were not lucky enough. May his soul rest in peace, and may his spirit live us, enable us to spread his principles of reform that will help humanity, his principles of ecological reform that he has even presented it to the United Nations organization. I think Pope Francis will be remembered a Pope who loved humanity and who loved to see this world as a common home given to us by God for everyone without any barriers of religion and culture. May it come true in our country, in the world, and may the world live in peace. Long live Pope in our hearts.